Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, and today's safety tip is to make sure that you do not have any leaning pallets or pallets that are standing on their side. While pallets may seem like they can be balanced on their side, they can fall over at any time, or you can easily bump into them. So you want to make sure that they do not fall over, hit anyone when they're falling over, and by avoiding keeping them on their side, you can make sure that they stay flat on the ground and that there is no possibility of them falling over. So make sure you keep those leaners in check and keep them on the floor.
With e-commerce off the charts, many small and growing warehouses are asking, how can I get ahead when my warehouse is barely keeping up? The answer is future-ready warehouse tech from Zebra Technologies. Warehouses can simplify and upgrade all processes, from automated inventory management to hands-free picking, with Zebra's tailored, scalable mobile solutions. They're simple and intuitive. There's never been a better time to upgrade for success with Zebra. How can your warehouse get ahead? The answer's in black and white. Get the answers at zebra.com/theanswer. That's zebra.com/theanswer.
Outdated and bulky, legacy scanning technology continues to drain warehouse efficiency. To keep up, warehouse operators are turning to flexible hardware solutions, like WorkHero from Rufus Labs. Utilizing WorkHero's efficiency-boosting wearable scanning technology, mobile device management, and labor management tools, warehouse managers will be able to easily access key performance metrics and improve operations. With their cutting-edge monthly subscription model, you're always provided with the latest barcode scanning wearables, productivity analytics software, on-site redundancies, and 24/7 global support. Superhumanly simple. Make your warehouse team superhuman with WorkHero. Go to www.getrufus.com to learn more and schedule your free demo. That's www.getrufus.com.
Fulfillment demand continues to skyrocket and outpace available labor. To keep up, warehouse operators are turning to flexible fulfillment solutions like 6 River Systems. Utilizing 6 River Systems' award-winning combination of collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, and operational expertise will make your associates and wall-to-wall fulfillment workflow more efficient. No new infrastructure, no change to warehouse layout, easy to deploy and scale, easy to train and retain associates, all at half the cost of traditional automation. Want to take your fulfillment operation to the next level? Go to www.6river.com to learn more. That's www.6river.com to learn more.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I am going to be joined by Megan Preston Meyer, and she is the managing partner and writer for Preston Meyer Group, which is her own company. She has a background in analytics and insights within the business world, but she shifted her career and she has focused on becoming writer of kids books to focus on bringing supply chain to children's lives, getting them interested in different facets of supply chain at an early age, which is much needed, I think, in our curriculum and also in the world. The supply chain is such a growing industry, and we always need talent within that industry as well. So Megan is joining us all the way from Switzerland. So she's going to tell us a little bit about her background, how she kind of became a writer and came up with this idea for these kids' books. So Megan, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Kevin. Thank you for having me. I I created the Adventures of Supply Chain and FIFO to, just like you said, to get kids interested in this whole world of supply chain and operations management concepts. I did spend more than a decade in the corporate world, instead in analytics, in supply chain and sort of supply chain adjacent areas. And so I saw a lot of this world. I did everything from figuring out grain loss and barley supply chains to optimizing the use of byproducts in beer brewing, to then demand forecasting and purchasing super perishable fresh food. And I found really, really, really interesting stories and interesting areas to work in. But it was not anything when I was in fourth grade that I would have said, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a supply chain analyst. Like, that just wasn't on my radar. And so part of the reason I have these books is because I want to start getting it on kids' radars a lot earlier.
Interesting. So you kind of went through this career in the corporate environment, like you said, working with analytics mostly and doing these heavy data analysis for different aspects of businesses, including some supply chain things as well. But you decided to make this pivot. So I'm curious, what kind of sparked the idea or the want to kind of switch things up and go away from the numbers, I guess, and to the words?
That's a great question. So when I was in fourth grade, if you had asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, I would have said a writer. And somewhere along the way, I realized, that's not a real job, or you need to have a real job first. And that I still, I 100% agree with. I don't think I could have just, started out and been successful as a writer, because I wouldn't have had anything to say. And the pivot between the numbers and the words, I spent a lot of my career trying to tell stories with data. And I was digging into the numbers, trying to see how we could form a narrative. There's all kinds of information out there, but we as humans, we react a lot better to a story than a spreadsheet. And so I started throughout my career sort of moving from, if there's a spectrum from pure data through information, through analytics, through insights, into business recommendations, I was steadily moving along that spectrum more towards the insights and the recommendations and the communication of data-driven decisions. And I realized one day that I was good at the data stuff, but I was much better at the communicating. And so I decided just to go kind of full bore into how to formulate messages, how to help others formulate messages, how to really decide what, data never tells the whole story. And so I wanted to focus on the other half, kind of the stories that data doesn't tell.
That's pretty interesting, because I think a lot of times what you run into is, people are either on the number side or they're on the story side, right? A lot of people, if you put a bunch of numbers in front of them, they almost freak out. They're like, I can't deal with this. Spreadsheet's not my thing, right? So it's interesting that you kind of found the balance in between the two, which I think is really a unique talent to have and skill to have as well. So I'm curious, with the analyzing the data and then interpreting it into a story, what kind of tips do you have for our listeners who may be, looking at data sets and then trying to potentially interpret that data and regurgitate it or put it in a format that their bosses or their executive teams can really easily digest and understand what they're trying to convey?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
I think the key word there is interpret. And we can get, I've seen this a lot, we get so concerned with the actual numbers, what they, what each number, how precise it is, what degree of confidence we have, what a beautiful dashboard looks like, how we can visualize the data. But really, the data is never ever an end in itself. It's a means to a decision. When we talk about data-driven decisions, it seems like the focus is shifting more towards the data-driven part and less on the decision. And so I would say that before you even look at a number, before you open up Excel, decide or be very clear on the decision that needs to be made. Whatever analysis you're doing there, the end goal is to make a change, most likely. You either need to stop doing something, you need to improve something. And so decide what it is, decide on the question you're trying to answer, and then formulate your analysis and your presentation or your recommendation. All of that should be leading up to answering the question. And so don't get too bogged down by the details and the actual, the numbers and the statistics, because they're never ever going to be 100% accurate. We're never going to have all of the data we really, we would like to make the perfect decision. And so we need just as much information to create a recommendation to go forward in the best way, and no more than that.
Interesting. So I like what you said there about, going into it knowing what decision you want to make, and then let the data guide the decision, basically. So I think it's really important, because you have, especially now, you just have tons and tons of data flowing in from everywhere. And, it's great to be capturing data, but then it's a whole another thing to take it to the next level and be able to interpret, understand that data, and make the right decisions based on it. So it's a really good tip there. And I think you're interesting as I guess in a sense, I guess usually writers, they call them wordsmiths, right? So you're kind of a numbersmith and a wordsmith combined. So let's talk a little bit about the book, because you made this transition to become a writer, and you decided to, I guess, do something very niche, right? And write about supply chain, not just supply chain, but supply chain like for kids. So how did you, I guess, initially land on the idea of, I guess, I don't know whether what came first, the idea to write for kids or the idea to write about supply chain?
The idea to write about supply chain came first.
Interesting.
And it actually started with a pun. So my husband and I we were hiking, and we were exchanging supply chain puns, as one does. And we were talking about just-in-time delivery, and we thought, just in time would be a great name for an action hero. And then we were talking, just in time was already taken by, I guess there was a Christian show, I think it was from Canada. And so I thought, okay, well, I still have these stories, and I still think it would be cool that, to introduce kids to some of these concepts in kind of a fun way. So I had to come up with a different hero. And so we went back, we were thinking of more puns, and happened upon Supply Jane. And I actually like that a lot better. And Supply Jane now, the one thing, she's a girl, and it's not, I don't know that that's the most important thing about her, but I think she's a lot more relatable because she's a kid. And if I had used more of a traditional superhero, like Just in Time, like their superheroes are cool, but you don't see yourself in one of them. And so I think Supply Chain is, well, I'm not a 8-year-old, but I I think that supply chain is a lot more relatable than, someone with a cape flying around. So that's where the idea came from. And then, like I said, once there was a character, we had to find adventures. And so I created a couple of little stories and have ideas for several more.
So a very interesting story. I mean, I love that it started with supply chain puns. I think that's pretty funny. As you said, what you do, in your casual time as a normal person, just trading supply chain puns, right? But yeah, I love that it landed on this supply chain, and then it's supply chain and FIFO as well, right? So who's FIFO?
FIFO, yep. I can't believe I didn't introduce FIFO sooner. FIFO is supply chain's canine companion, your sidekick. And for being a sidekick, he actually has the starring role in the first book, which is called FIFO Saves the Day. And a lot of your listeners will probably recognize his name, hopefully. Once again, another pun. But so the first book, in the Adventures of Supply Chain and FIFO Saves the Day is kind of, as the name implies, it teaches kids the concept of first in, first out, and stock rotation.
Interesting. So how did you, I guess, land on, obviously we heard about how you land on kind of the character names and things like that, but how did you land on what type of concepts to focus on because the audience is kids, right? And for the most part, I imagine these kids that are going to read this book have probably not been familiarized with supply chain at all, right? So how did you decide what topic of the supply chain world to kind of focus on and introduce to these kids for probably the first time?
I tried to choose concepts that they're not, it's not like if you go to a supply chain textbook or something. I didn't want to choose something that's super complex and super specific, I guess, because first in, first out is a concept that anyone can see. A kid can go to the grocery store when they're there, in the milk section. They can look at the expiration dates and they can see, if you kind of rifle back to the back of the shelf, you can find products that have a longer shelf life, or the expiration date is a little bit further out. I do not recommend this, children. This is not the moral of the story, because products are placed in the shelf in order for a reason. But it is something it's very accessible. It's a very universal concept. I mean, it's not just for perishable food, but having this idea that the first thing that you put in should be the first thing that you take out. Everything gets used. You can use that in all sorts of concepts. I mean, it's a good decision-making heuristic too. So if you're, for instance, I use this all the time. If I'm trying to decide to, what to have for dinner, and I look in my fridge and I've got pork chops and hamburger, and even if they both expire next week, it's not like one is going to go bad, but that's just a much easier way for me to decide, well, this one expires next Wednesday, I will eat that instead of the one that expires next Thursday.
Right.
So it's one of those, it's like this little hidden piece of logic that makes the world go round. I mean, it's in use everywhere, and once you know, it's like being let in on a little secret, and then you can see it everywhere.
Yeah, I love that last point that you had there, because supply chain is like so ubiquitous in our world, right? I mean, it's how everything goes around. There's so many different points of like our consumer lifestyle that it touches and makes things available and accessible for us, and really the evolution of the supply chain overall, the global supply chain, has made the world, in a sense, quite smaller. It's made people be able to access things that 100 years ago probably could not even imagine accessing, but within a couple of days, no problem. So it's very interesting. I love that you're kind of tying the concepts back to what kids can relate to in just everyday life, like the grocery store, even though you're encouraging them to destroy the shelves at the grocery store and get the stuff from the back. But, it's a very good thing. So I'm curious, what has been like some of the reactions from kids who have read it? Has it sparked interest in learning more about the supply chain for them?
I'm not sure that, I don't know that it's gone full circle yet, where I haven't had any parents who have called me up and said, hey, my child is now enrolled at a supply chain charter school in, third grade to start learning about procurement. But I have gotten feedback where one person said, I gave the book to my nephew, and now he's really interested in eating leftovers, which I loved that bit of feedback because it's a very tangible, that made a difference in the way that he thought. He thought about things a little bit deeper, not just sort of, food comes from the refrigerator or food comes from the grocery store. So starting to see that there's more to it, I thought that was really gratifying, and I'm sure that his parents probably appreciate the fact that he's going to leftovers now too.
All right, so that's great, and it's very interesting, and like I said in the beginning, and you kind of reiterated as well, is that it's so important to get people interested and aware of supply chain earlier on, and obviously not to force people into supply chain, but there is such a strong need, and supply chain has become just such like a hot topic, especially with the pandemic, and all the highlights of how impacts on the global supply chain can have such a big kind of wave throughout our typical everyday lives, and just getting regular things that we never thought twice about. It's just always available, and all of a sudden there's this disruption, and supply chain is everywhere. It's on everybody's mind, right? So I'm curious, beyond the book, how do you think like we can keep these like kids and younger people like more interested in supply chain, and kind of make sure that we're creating the awareness more and helping kind of build up talent for the future in supply chain?
I think that's a great question, and it's a huge issue. I think one of the main aspects is visibility, really. If you think about a career day in an elementary school, you might see the options that are made available are, you could be a doctor or a lawyer or a fireman, or some of these more traditional, very concrete careers. And some of that, I think, honestly, is just because they're easy to describe, or they're easy to illustrate in a book. If you're talking about being a doctor, doctors wear stethoscopes. If you're talking about being a fireman or policeman, they wear uniforms. So you can look at a crowd and pick out, these professions. But, what does a supply chain professional look like? I mean, they're wearing a polo shirt or a button down, or depending on, maybe you're working from home and wearing a hoodie. So there's no visual element, and so it makes it a little bit, it's more abstract. There's no good, clear way to kind of sketch out, like, here's a supply chain professional. And then besides that too, what's a supply chain professional? There's
so many things.
Hundreds of job titles that actually kind of fall into there. And so it's a communication challenge, just like anything else, where there's so much to say, and so picking out just the little key points that will make it clear enough that here are all of the potential challenges and sort of a day-to-day, this is what your routine would look like. How do you do that for some of these jobs that the kids, they're not as exciting as being a fireman, they're not as well-defined. And so I think a lot of it is really just bringing visibility to this whole world, and with these concepts that are a little bit easier to grasp, like first in, first out, like bottlenecks, like purchasing, like transportation. Every kid knows what a boat looks like, in a truck, and a plane, and a plane. So we should be using some of these visual cues more and start building this association earlier on.
Definitely, yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, I think creating the awareness and bringing that visibility, and kind of, like you said, using the things that kids can recognize and younger people can recognize, like, the boats, the trucks, the planes, and bring them beyond the truck can be a transformer type of idea, and realize, like, okay, how did you get your Christmas gift got here through, it was like on a boat, and then maybe it was on a plane because dad forgot to order it until the last minute and need to be air shipped over here. But all those different things, and trying to associate that, I mean, it's a great tip there, and great advice. And I think that we need to get better at doing those types of things. I think I'm currently teaching at a university, teaching a supply chain course, and it's interesting that even some of the students are just regular business majors, not supply chain majors, and even them they're not fully aware of, like, all the things that supply chain touches. It's pretty interesting, and you even see, like, kids not really deciding that they want to major in supply chain until, like, their second, third, fourth year, even, because they're unsure, or they're not aware of it. So it goes, like, all through the different, I think, levels of schooling, and high school and middle school, and now, for kids as well, through books like this, just kind of exposing them and making them aware that that's something that's out there. So really, really great insights. And I love, the book and the concept of the book. It makes so much sense for the kids, and it's a great thing that you're doing. So I want to thank you for coming on this show today, Megan. But how can people find the book? Where can they find the book at and purchase it?
The easiest place to find the book is at www.supply-jane.com, and that has the links to Amazon. You can buy it directly from Gumroad too. For U.S. listeners, Amazon is going to work just fine. For anyone in the rest of the world, Gumroad is the better option.
Okay.
And then you can find me on social media at M. Preston Meyer on Twitter and Instagram, and I always have links to my books. I mention them quite often because I'm very proud of them. So that's the other place you can find them.
As you should be. You should be very proud. And we talked about Supply Jane and FIFO, but there's two books, right?
Yep. So the first one is FIFO Saves the Day, and then, like I said, that one's on First In, First Out. The second one that is brand new, just coming out in October, is called Supply Jane Clears the Way. And that one teaches kids about bottlenecks in manufacturing.
Okay, very interesting.
It's sort of a goal for kids, or the goal, I guess, by Eli Goldratt. Do you know that book?
Which book is it?
Theory of Constraints.
Oh, the Theory of Constraints, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I read the book, I read The Goal when I was doing my MBA, and I remember thinking, I want to write a book like this. It was kind of one of the first business novels.
Yeah.
And here, several years later, it's not a novel, but I like to think I've done something similar.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, great. And we'll put all the information to get those books and to connect with Megan on the newwarehouse.com, so you can get those out to your kids. And if there's any kids listening to the podcast as well, tell your parents. I don't know if there's any kids that listen to the podcast, but if there is, thank you, and tell your parents to get the book for you. So Megan, thank you very much for joining me all the way from Switzerland, and I appreciate you being on the show, and thank you for your time.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the new warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the new warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.